Hello, everybody. Welcome to 2026, and really happy to be here on the January episode of the Talking Headless show. As you know, the Talking Headless show is more for the analyst relations and the technology analysts community. What we'd like to do is give more visibility to the community. It's still very small despite technology growing so much and a very bright future ahead. So, today's show, I'm really happy to have two wonderful guests. The first guest will be Arthur Bailey. Many of you may know him already. I consider him the OG of analyst relations, but he didn't just be a analyst relations leader. He was more a marketing leader, very well entrenched in enterprise marketing and communications. I met him at the Infotech Live, and just following him, his content, and the talks that he gives. He did one at the recent AR Insights conference. It's really good. Another aspect that I like about Arthur is also the global experience. I mean, I think whichever country you're in, there are certain nuances that you have to look at when you're thinking about countries. And by the way, before I bring Arthur on, let me introduce myself, which I forgot to do at the beginning of this. My name is Shashi Balamkonda. My day job is I'm a principal research director for the Infotech Group. We are a group of about 40,000 members and over 400 analysts and executive counselors. So with that, let me bring Arthur on stage. Feel free to join in with your comments, questions, and any suggestions that you may have. Welcome, Arthur. How are you doing today?
Hi, Sashi. Great to be here. Thank you very much.
Where are you joining us from?
I'm actually based in Switzerland, and I'm in Bern, Switzerland, but I commute back and forth between Bern and our offices in the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, I don't know if I did a good job introducing you, but why don't you say a few words about who Arthur Bailey is?
Sure. Background-wise, I've been in technology, as you're saying. I'm an OG. I've been in technology for a little over 25 years. I started off working in doing licensing actually as a marketing lead for Microsoft, and then slid into analyst relations. This is probably the second time that I've had a role that's mixed of analyst relations as opposed to previously I was doing analyst relations, PR, marketing, wearing a lot of hats. I've worked for a lot of large companies, Microsoft, Amazon, Samsung, and now I'm working for a startup called Mimik that is going to be a big company down the road.
Yeah, actually, we don't usually talk about companies on this show, but I really wanted to talk about Mimic a little bit because the technology is very different, and your interaction with the analysts as being part of, your portfolio includes analyst relations. How is that different from other companies at Mimic?
Well, I think what's really unique and what's different for me in this role, particularly in the analyst relations part, is it's less about chasing, as we say, chasing the dot. It's less about positioning ourselves in reports. It's more about positioning ourselves from how is the world of technology changing, specifically in the AI space. If you can take an example of when people talk about quantum and where quantum is going. Talking about qubits is not of interest to an end customer. Talking about what it can do for me in the end is what they want to hear about. So Mimic is very much about how we can help customers understand what the underlying technology and the architecture can do in terms of multiple platforms. I give example where nowadays most solutions are built client server. And so if you're an app developer, everything you do goes to the cloud. And as a result of that, every time you grow and grow your customers, so does your cloud bill. And there's opportunities to re-architect your infrastructure and re-architect your designs so that some things go to the cloud, but not everything goes to the cloud. And I can actually save money and be more efficient.
Yeah, that's very nice. Now, coming back to where you are today, how has your journey been, like from like those days in Microsoft to how did you get into analyst relations the first time?
Sure. So the unique thing is my company, I've been with startups for a while, and then only stuck to big names and brands. So it's interesting to make the transition back to a startup and have to explain what the company does. But I was working for a Danish ERP company that actually got acquired by Microsoft back in 2002. And why all my teammates who were in marketing decided, oh, I want to go work for Windows, I want to go work for Office. I decided to take a job in marketing for actually Microsoft licensing, which is, a very odd thing to think about, but I really wanted to know how they made money. And so licensing was how they made money. And having an understanding of that platform and what they were using and the enterprise agreements actually helped me in my career further down when I worked for other companies and we're looking at, guess what? It's about not just about the product we make, but how are we going to sell it? How are we going to go to market? How are we going to help make it easy for customers to acquire it? I think analyst relations, particularly, and people in AR need to think it's not just about getting reports. It's about understanding holistically who your company is and what their objectives are and how you can help them through analysts align those objectives. Everything, it's not just about the product capabilities, but it's about the go-to-market. I like to use the analogy when a customer, everybody likes a Ferrari. They know it's a great car, but not everybody can afford a Ferrari. So it's not about being the best product. Sometimes it's about, hey, we have the best customer service. We're the most responsive. Our price points are good. We have more flexibility to the customer. Customers have a lot of demands and all of them aren't just about product capability. So the point of the analyst relations person is to merge or help synthesize your differences specifically in a particular market or a particular vertical, and then helping the analysts understand those differences, and then therefore the analyst translating those differences to the customer.
I have one question which is kind of off topic here a little bit. How technical should analyst relations people be? Any thoughts on that? Or should they just learn?
Well, I think it depends on the company. Some analysts and some people, some companies expect the person to know the platform and know the area very, very deeply. Security is a perfect example. I think it depends on what the analyst relations person's job is and who he's reporting to. Analyst relations, unlike other jobs inside of a corporate world, finance is finance. That's it, right? Product development is product development. Analyst relations can sit in many areas. It can sit in marketing. It can sit in PR. It can sit in product development. It can sit in product management. So part of the analyst relations role is where do you sit, and then how what you do translates into the business need. I may not understand all the capabilities of my technology, but I understand how my company needs to go to market. I understand how my company wants to be understood from a narrative perspective. And helping articulate that to the analyst is a critical point. You can bring in executives who have much deeper knowledge and PhDs to talk about the technology. Your role is to help that executive communicate in the manner that the analyst wants to be understood, but also to bridge the relationships. I've had examples of executives that they didn't have a high respect for the analyst. They thought they knew more. And having to educate them to understand that it's not about who's the smartest person in the room. It's about what's your objective in terms of this engagement and what are we trying to get to. And so even if the analyst doesn't understand everything that you understand, helping him understand is in the end helping the customer to understand.
That's true. No, very interesting to hear that from your experience. My pet peeve sometimes is the excessive use of acronyms. And sometimes they are internal acronyms that people have created. So that's have you seen that also?
That's always my biggest challenge when I'm reviewing decks and before presentations is we tend to talk our own language. And it may be the language of IT, but it's not the language of business. So it's really a challenge to help executives not be 3 slides in and talking about the technology, as opposed to talking about, hey, this is where we see the industry. This is the opportunity we see. These are the challenges and opportunities. Let's talk about what business problem we solve and then go into the technology. It's probably very challenging for an AR person when they're presenting to an analyst, and depends on where the analyst is from and who the analyst is, to get the executives to not just deep dive into the technologies and all the bells and whistles that it has.
That's true. No, I think it's a good point for everybody who's listening. And feel free to put your questions and comments in the box. We can actually show them on stage too. One of the things, Arthur, that I asked Anushka Khanna in the December episode, she moved from the UK to the US. Um, the assumption that analyst relations is the same across the globe is probably not true. I don't have as much experience with analysts in different countries, but you do have analyst relations. How have you perceived, like, what is the relationship in different parts? Maybe talk about APAC versus Europe versus the Americas, maybe. So,
So depending on the market that the firm is selling into, analyst relations basically, and the AR manager has to be a bit of a diplomat because there are cultural differences in how you engage, both engaging with your internal executives in the company, but also engaging with analysts from certain places. When I worked for companies that were based in the Asian market, the biggest challenge for me was all they wanted from analysts was the data. You know, what's the market growth? You know, what are the opportunities? Obviously, they also wanted market intelligence that the analysts couldn't share, and that was always a challenge helping the executives understand they're not going to tell you your competitors' secrets. But then I had one unique opportunity where we were very much relying on the analysts for the data and never looked to the talking to the analysts about go to market and how we go to market. And we had a very unique incident that resulted in us having to actually engage with analysts. And when we came back to market, we actually used the analysts to come back to market because we had talked to them, you know, under NDA for a long time about our new story. And we went to market with that narrative with the analysts first before we went to the media to help sort of drive that direction. And that was very helpful. In the European market, I find working with analysts, it's quite much about the frameworks of how what you're doing in your technology applies to the regulations. So analysts get very, very upset when you start talking about, oh, we can do this and we can do that. And then they bring up, well, what about GDPR? Or what about the European AI Act? And, you know, there's a blank face on the executive's face because they don't tend to think that way. And so part of that challenge is making sure when you're giving a message in a particular market that you're catering that message to how the people in that market look first, or what the things the things they look at first. Analysts in the US, very much about traction. You know, I've worked with some of the larger firms, and the feedback has always been, well, we won't even talk to you unless you're doing $1 billion. Well, you know, $1 billion is a lot of revenue, but it's not the end all and be all. When you think about, you've got to get to $1 billion at a certain stage, you have to start somewhere. I look at companies like Intuit and how they went to market. They didn't go to market selling through campaigns. They actually sold through accounting firms, and those sold through accountants, and sort of had a reference system. And those references actually led up to analysts saying, well, guess what? We're hearing a lot about you. And they, you know, they grew from there and became a bigger opportunity and a bigger company. So I think it's just, as you plan your go-to-market and as you work with your marketing team and your sales team, how you're going to use analyst relations in your program is very much tied to the countries that you're engaging with, and the plan needs to align to those countries and their cultural values.
very useful. I'm sure we're already seeing a lot of cross-border conversations between the US, Europe. A lot of, I mean, in my day job, I actually see a lot of companies who are in Europe or Asia who want to come to the US. So I think what you said is going to be very useful for analyst relations team that are considering that. Very recently, we had a briefing from a company that is so large but virtually unknown in the North American market. So that's very useful. Thinking about your time and thinking about today, if somebody wanted to get into analyst relations, what's your advice to them today?
I think analyst relations is a very unique sort of area to be in from a career perspective, because there's no direct path. There's no, oh, go get a degree here or get a certification there. There are certification programs, and quite a few AR Insights and other firms, Knowledge Capital, other firms all have those training courses. But that doesn't mean, hey, you can do the job. It's sort of like going to a training course to be a football player, and then actually being in a game and taking your first hit and saying, whoa, this is not what I expected it to be. I say, if you're going to start off, if you're not just applying for an analyst relations job, but you're interested in the field, probably the easiest thing is how you can, depending on your role, how you can align what you're doing to what the AR team is doing. If you're a marketing person, okay, how can I work with AR to vet my campaigns? You know, a lot of people tend to go to market without ever vetting their campaigns. Like, well, we think we know, we've done some insight reporting and, you know, we've done some studies with customers, but we haven't actually talked to analysts who actually understand how customers buy, and maybe our go-to-market strategy and how how we're selling is not going to work for this market. So marketing, that's one way. I think if you're in sales, you should be engaging with analyst relations, and particularly in terms of how can you help me close deals? And do you have research? My last job when I was working at AWS, we had a total dedicated program for influencers, and by influencers in terms of influencing sales. So we were literally tracking the numbers of how many deals we had engaged with and whether or not those deals closed, and whether or not those deals closed faster, or, you know, those deals close in a better position as a result of either bringing in content, bringing in analyst insights. Just there's many different ways, I think, of coming into analyst relations. I think the probably the biggest challenge for most people is it is about relations. And so being able to be social, I mean, you can be very practical, you can be very down to earth and to the point and great at program management, but if you can't engage with people, it's a very hard career to be in, because it is very much about engagement, and it's very much about how you communicate with people. I've had analysts that I've worked with for years that didn't necessarily have nice things to say about me, and when I say me, but personally my company, and they weren't thankful of that, what that company was doing. And then my career changed. I'm now with somebody else, but because we had a good relationship, they were much more open to talking to me and to listening to what my company had to say, as opposed to not having a relationship, not just, you know, always just preaching to them and not listening to them.
Well, I think you brought up a very important thing about it's a people business and building relationship irrespective of what opinions they have about the product or the company. Like even in this short time, I mean, I've been in this arena for 3 years, and people keep calling me out and saying, you can't say you're new or it's short. 3 years is a long time. But I've found people like immensely welcoming, as far as, you know, like, you exchange thoughts about, we went on a road trip with my son, and so many of the analysts who I knew actually gave me tips on where to stop and what to see during this cross-country trip. So I think there is a lot of personal relationship. I also find like sometimes you just have to talk to people without an agenda, just to, you know, keep that relationship going. That's really good. One thing, when you brought up the sales aspect of it, I'm finding a lot of analyst relations professionals find it very difficult to bring in sales into the conversation, because sometimes it's entirely either product or marketing, and sales doesn't know, like, hey, how can this analyst relationships help me? Any comment on that, Drew? How did you succeed?
So it's and this is where the internal relationship starts. It's about making actually pitches to the sales team. I mean, and you may start with a particular sales leader, or you may actually start with a salesperson. It's like I can help you do these things. You have to put a stake in the ground. You have to say, you know, working with me is going to enable you to do this. We did monthly webinars with both the sales team, but also with sales leaders, in terms of, hey, you know, here's the latest insights from these analysts about this particular topic. Sovereignty is a big area of interest, particularly in Europe, and what analysts were hearing from customers about sovereignty. And that was getting the sales team's insights and helping the sales teams from a messaging perspective. A lot of it is about how you talk to the customer and what you talk to the customer about. And so helping the sales teams understand how analyst relations can help them with their narrative and help them with their messaging, but then also how the research that the analysts have and some of the insights that the analysts have written down can help them with their closing those deals. Because sometimes it's as much as sending them a link to a webinar that explains why this is the way to go, and not analysts won't necessarily endorse your product, but their insights can be favorable towards your product and help you from a messaging perspective. And then obviously on the marketing side, A lot of people don't utilize this, but a lot of analyst firms allow you to use their research with your marketing. They'll say, hey, I will let you wrap your marketing around a specific research piece, or we'll do a podcast with you talking about technology. The analyst is not going to endorse your technology, but obviously it's your podcast. And so your brand is associated with that conversation. So part of it is helping the sales team and helping the marketing team understand analysts are talking to customers, and the more visibility that you have with those analysts in your firm, the better position you can be in as a company.
Excellent points. I'm sure it's almost like a one-on-one on analyst relations plus some kind of validation for some of our more experienced professionals. Another question that keeps coming up is many of the analyst relations professionals, sometimes they have large teams, sometimes they go in, particularly in startups, as a single person managing analyst relations. At this stage, I think prioritization is very tough. And sometimes you can't bring the same analysts over who you had a good relationship. You have to keep building it. Anything from your own experience where you've said, like, is it time management? Is it relationship management? What works when you move from a larger team, managing a larger team, to being an individual contributor in a way?
Sure. So, like you say, I'm an OG in this space. I've been on analyst relations teams that are as large as 100, which is probably the largest in the industry, to, I'm the only person, a single person. I think the first start is, what do we want from the firms we engage with? And some people, they sort of shotgun their approach to analyst relations. I have to talk to everybody, and talking to everybody is not necessarily advantageous for you if you're a single shop versus talking to the ones who have the most influence on the accounts that you're actually going after. So I think, for example, I can be talking to an analyst in the Asian market, but if I don't sell in the Asian market, his endorsement doesn't do anything for me because I don't have clients there. And so you have to really think about, okay, the analysts that I engage with, what influence are they having on the clients that I'm actually engaging with? And why some have great influence across the board, you can't talk to everybody. So it's better to focus your resources on the ones that can actually help you measure how you move the needle for your company. And then obviously, if you're successful with those, you can get more resources, you can get more funding, and you can expand your program.
Very nice. What have you noticed in terms of, like, now everybody wants information on demand versus a very thoughtful one? I know for sure I've been doing a little bit of research on AI-powered search, and analyst content actually comes up very high because number one, credibility. Number one, it's like well thought out. How are you managing this flow of information where everybody wants it very quickly? Any thoughts on, even people using AI?
Yeah, I think the one thing that has to get better, and this is more in the analyst firms models in terms of how they go to market, is how people consume data. I know Infotech has moved quite quickly in terms of creating chatbots for their customers inside to find data quickly. I think what my personal opinion is, people don't mind paying for information, but they don't want to read 20-page reports. They want to be able to say, hey, I will pay you $500 or for 500 inquiries across my organization, and let me ask the question and query your database on the question I want to know. Like, what is the market size for this? When I use some LMM models, I particularly am preferable for Perplexity because it gives you additional prompts in terms of what you should be thinking about. I think as analyst research is still quite critical, but it's how it's formatted for the customer and how easy it's for the customer to consume is where AI is going to make the change. And some firms are moving in that direction more quickly than others. The other part of this is, yes, customers, whether you like them or not, will drop your research into an LMM. You have to make sure that if that's happening in your case, how do you sort of indemnify your research in terms of what do I have on the inside that is still not in that report? And what that is the insights of the analyst. It's the positioning of Well, the report doesn't say which markets are adopting this product faster and more quickly. So it's a blending of using AI as it is as a platform, but also for the analyst firms using AI to better serve the customer and make it easier for them to consume all the information that they provide. Everybody doesn't still go to the library, but libraries are still relevant because guess what? They still have the information. The AI agent may scrape the library and give you an answer, but the library still has to be there for it to scrape. So I think it's critical to understand that analyst research is not going away, and it's very important. It's just about how easy it is to consume going forward.
This was great, Arthur. I'm sure the audience were found it very insightful. I did definitely. And by the way, I'm also a big fan of libraries, even though I don't go to it as much. But if there is a bucket list, it is like spending time reading books in the library at some point. Please stay, and I'll bring you on and John Arnold towards the end of the show.
Sure.
I think today we have a very shy audience because I haven't seen any questions or comments. But feel free to comment if it is there. So we'll see you in a bit, Arthur. Thank you. Well, our next guest is John Arnold of Arnold Associates. I've met him at several conferences. He gets invited to cover a lot of new technology. He has an independent analyst practice, and he's been around. He's another OG with over 30 years of experience with market research. But I'm going to bring him up, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about him. Hey, John, how are you doing?
All right. Hey, Shashi, great. Really, I'm doing fine, and you sound great too. And I'm very happy to be in the group here. Uh, we've known each other a long time, run into each other at events, etc. We both cast a pretty wide net in our worlds. And small factoid for people who are listening and watching our gathering here. So your company, Infotech, is Canadian. I'm based in Toronto, and their head offices are here in Toronto, actually. They purchased a very famous concert venue years ago, and I've always been jealous of them for having that because it was a great venue for music. But anyway, so we have a little common ground here. London, Ontario, I know is where a lot of the analysts are based, and the work gets done there. But when I was starting out in the analyst world, and we'll get to this stuff and bring Arthur in soon too, I started my kind of career in this space with Frost & Sullivan. I was one of the very early people they brought in to build their practice in Canada as their first kind of foray to this country. They were located in Toronto. And and certainly I knew of Infotech back then as well. And it was just really good to be part of that world. And I think we all find, Shashi, that there's no linear path to being an analyst. This is a very strange line of work, I will tell you. It's certainly like a third career for me. And you don't go to school to be an analyst. And that's what makes this space so interesting. You kind of have to put in the time and earn it and get us to a certain level of knowledge and, of course, connections in the industry you're covering.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad to have you on the show today. And for the audience, feel free to post your questions. Usually the audience is not shy, but today there seems to be a little hesitancy unless you all feel like Arthur and John are answering everything, so there are no more questions to ask. John, you're joining us from Canada. How's the weather today?
Do you really have to ask? It's it's January. We're up to our waists in snow. Yeah, it's heavy winter time for sure. And like you, I travel a lot, and my run of travel starts up again in about 2 weeks. And the most anxious part of travel coming from here is going to places that are warmer, which is what you want to do. But you're always dreading the flight delays and cancellations when storms hit. And there's always anxiety traveling around February and March. It's, peak winter time here. But it will pass, and I'll be back on the road quite soon. And I think I'll be running into you probably at Enterprise Connect in March. That's my guess.
Probably the next one that you're going. Uh, so tell us a little bit about Arnold Associates, your journey to being an analyst, and what are you covering now? What kind of companies? And then we'll talk a little bit more about your experience and advice.
Sure. So yeah, I really enjoyed hearing Arthur's backstory and what Mimic is up to and his role. Very familiar. Everything he was saying, I could echo a lot of that as well. So as I mentioned, this is not an area of you just kind of aspire to when you're younger. Say, I want to be a technology analyst. It just doesn't work that way. I was certainly not thinking about this as a career. I had my own boutique market research practice for about 15 years, strictly on B2B areas. So I've researched and done work in just about every industry imaginable, and that provides that kind of like, it's like having a liberal arts degree out of university. You've got that broad base of understanding about a lot of important things, and that translated really well into being an analyst, especially for Frost and Sullivan, because they're different from most analyst firms in that they're not just tech. They are across all verticals: automotive, pharma, you name it. They cover all kinds of industries. Many of them are more mature than tech. So it was interesting when tech has a bad run, they don't do well in a tech practice, but the more mature, stable industries like manufacturing stay well. So it's actually, strategy wise, it's a good diversification plan to not put all your eggs in one basket in the analyst world. But I got thrown into the world of VoIP, VoIP, around
Yep.
2000. And I was early enough in the evolution of that technology that I didn't know anything. I really started from almost zero knowledge. But within a year and a half, 2 years, I became, as far as I could tell, the leading VoIP analyst in the whole industry. And I just happened to be right place, right time, making the right connections with the people who are really shaping that technology, especially in the US. And I was really had a front row seat to the most connected people. And so it was a great place for me to get that knowledge for that industry and built on it. And back then, Shashi, you could focus as an analyst just in one thing, like VoIP, and you could be pretty happy doing that. And so I did my share of quarterly reports, doing infrastructure, media gateways, media servers, session border controllers. That was kind of my world, tracking that data from all the vendors and building up market reports and shares and growth figures, all that kind of thing. And anyways, that was really good. But now, like, you have to know like 20 different technologies. And so concentric circles, the longer you stay in the business, keep adding to the conversation. So VoIP became unified communications, and then cloud came along, and then unified communications became UCaaS, and then all the other cloud platforms, CCaaS for contact center and CPaaS for the API business. All of a sudden, you're layering all of these technologies that are all related. And so your head can only absorb so much, but you learn by osmosis. And then, of course, AI is just a whole other quantum level beyond everything here that you got to know about. So you have to build some fences around it, Like I know those spaces really, really well. I can't tell you a whole lot about, 6G. I can't tell you a lot about networking technologies or security architectures. I understand them at a high level, but you got to pick your spots. And also, the most important part of this conversation, I think, for us, Shashi, is that I'm an independent, and we are a very small tribe in the analyst world. So there were two branches to the tree that I think of. That's the firms, the Gartners and Forresters and Frosts and IDCs. I know that world really well. And then there are the independents, and we're this like little side branch or a twig of that world. But we're really a valuable commodity because we are truly, we don't publish reports. We don't track the numbers. I don't follow that stuff. But we work from very close relationships with vendors who get to trust us and know us. And we can work a lot more creatively, a lot more, with a lot more agility than the big firms. So we don't require a six-figure admission price to talk to us. So we're a lot more accessible and being independent, but I can only scale so much as a one-man show. So there's a trade-off. And we're so esoteric that I am the only independent tech analyst in all of Canada in our space. There's nobody here who does what I do, but pretty much all of my work is in the US and EU. I'm American, so it's easy for me to work there. So, but in the US, yes, I can count on maybe two hands how many independent analysts there are. And I will tell you, because we've all been in this game a long time, you know, for all three of us on this call today, that we're aging out, frankly, as a group, because it takes a long time to become a credible analyst, at least 15, 20 years. You can't just do this when you're 20 years old. And once we age out, we're not seeing people coming up behind us as independents. And I put that out to the vendors that I do work for, because when we exit, they won't have much choice but to work with the big analyst firms. And that's going to be a loss. You talk about libraries earlier, the conversation. Well, if they go away, then what replaces that? So we're kind of a little bit of this artifact of analog times where we bring a lot of value and still do, but our numbers are not growing. So we are becoming a bit of an endangered species, I would say.
Very interesting. It's going to lead to me to ask you a subsequent question, but your wife comment, actually, now I realize we have a common friend, Jeff Pulver. Now I know why, right?
Thank you. That
I,
is,
I've known him for at least 2 decades, I think.
Well, that's the common thread here, right? And that's where it gets so interesting, because, so again, I talked about right place, right time. And for this particular industry, there was nobody more important to building community than Jeff. And I was in that inner circle for a very long time. And to this day, I still support Jeff. So currently, if you don't know, for the audience in particular, his latest focus is something called VCon, which stands for Virtual Conversations. And this, he believes, and the circle driving this for the innovation is kind of like a next level value piece that basically leverages the best of AI, the best of network technologies, and makes kind of the data that's inside organizations much more accessible and trustworthy, regardless of the format it comes in: text, voice, video. Anyways, it's very techie stuff, which I'm not that strong on, but I follow where it's going. And I was at his recent conference in Washington, D.C., which was a room full of regulatory lawyers and AI lawyers, and hearing about where this is going from their perspective was very fascinating, and a perspective no other analyst is going to get unless you're there in the room. So I still really look to Jeff for where a lot of the innovation is heading, and he's usually right. So we have common ground there for sure, and I continue to follow what he's doing pretty closely.
Yeah, I should catch up with him. And if you're ever in DC next time, let's have a cup of coffee.
Yes.
But the question that I wanted to ask you was, you made a very good point about, like, hey, who's going to take over? Because I think you need I'm going to call it variety for the lack of a better word. You need a variety of analysts, and independent analysts are definitely very important, especially if they're in a specific vertical, right? What advice do you have for people who should take up the mantle after the current analysts, maybe retire?
Well, so I'll start from the very top, which is AI. And our line of work in particular, I'm sure Arthur can vouch for this too. AI is impacting our line of work in not such a great way. Even in the last 6 months, it's visible to people like me and my peers that there's less demand for many of the things we typically have done, because organizations, the vendors, in particular service providers, can pretty easily get a lot of what you would call thought leadership that's entirely AI generated. So why would you engage or pay an analyst to do something that I can get done in 5 minutes for free? So the bottom line is, to stay relevant in this industry and in this type of work, you cannot compete with AI. You just cannot do it. It's too accessible, too easy. And as the enterprises and the people who consume our services get more comfortable with AI, it's going to be hard to turn back until you reach a point where you realize that if everybody is doing this, everybody's stuff is going to look and sound the same. And then they're going to realize, oh, we may have gone a little too far this way. We got to get these guys back. So people like me who are lifelong writers and communicators, we will stay relevant because we have a distinct, style and way of communicating that AI can't beat yet. So that's the good news, that if you can stay on that edge, you'll be okay, at least for now. But for younger people, Sashi, what's interesting is not only is it hurting people like us as small players, but even the big firms are struggling because their business model cannot be sustained in an AI world where so much information like the library is out there for anybody to tap into. So where is their value add in all of this? And it's drifting more and more to advisory type of stuff. Those, as you say, those reports have to be shorter, more bulleted. Again, that's where AI does good work, but can't replace what we bring. So what's happening now, and I'm seeing it too, analyst firms can't sustain what they're doing. They're losing people. They're laying off people. So all of a sudden, there are unemployed analysts who have nowhere to go. Well, for them, if you want to stay in the business, you become an independent. So I can name in the last 3 or 4 months, at least 3 people in my circle, that's been their story. They're saying, oh, okay, I better put my shingle out now as an independent. It's not for everybody. I've been a self-employed entrepreneur forever. So this is my lifestyle. I can do it. But if you're a stay-at-home, desk-bound analyst who's done nothing but write reports for 15 years, you're going to have a hard time making that gap because you got to sell and fulfill at the same time and keep your relationships current. That's a lot to do. And if you're only used to executing and fulfilling subscriptions, not selling, not building the sales relationships, that's going to be a hard bridge to make. So it's not for everybody. So, and again, it takes time. You can't just be 2 years into the business and all of a sudden be an independent because you don't have the pedigree yet that's credible enough for people to hire you to do paid work.
That's true. No, thank you for sharing that. One question that I asked Arthur that I'd like to ask you, since you said you also cover Europe, is, and maybe it also leads into another question that I've been meaning to ask, is what are some best practices for analyst relations in building relationship? Is it the same in the US versus Europe, or should it be different?
Well, it's good question, because I have noticed differences in the EU-based vendors that I have worked with and go to their events, right? As an analyst, their approach, it's a little less, I hate to say transactional, but I find that their approach is a little more kind of, less about AI based activities. It's more human based. I find it's more a little more relaxed, and a little more about the personal relationships that I find, because they also find too that they don't necessarily they may not have enough feet on the ground to know the day-to-day pulse of what's going on in the US, whereas which they look to as kind of like leading the market. Whereas people like me do, because we go to the Zoom, Ring Central, Cisco, we go to those events all the time. So we're kind of a bit of a window for them on that. So it's a bit of a kind of a gut test for them to say if we're really on the mark or not. Arthur mentioned earlier, in the EU, like, the Digital AI Act, for example, they're a little more traditional in the way they approach these things. They're walking more than running to AI. But unfortunately, in the EU, they are reaching a very serious inflection point where that caution to have a more human-based approach to adopting these technologies is starting to work against them, because the dominance of the American marketplace, and I hate to say it, but the Chinese market is becoming so entrenched that they're realizing this approach that they're taking is putting them behind the eight ball. And, that classic kind of dynamic between innovation and regulation, the EU market is coming to realize that this may put them at a permanent disadvantage. So some of them are now starting to realize we've got to play more aggressively. We've got to be a little less risk averse and focus more on the innovation and deal with the regulatory and, all those issues maybe a little bit later, or take a more relaxed stance. It's a difficult spot to be in because I happen to favor their approach than the US kind of. And as I said, when I was at Jeff's event in Washington, D.C., that's a real lament amongst the legal community that the current administration is hands off, very, not regulatory minded at all, and innovation, go fast, break things, that mentality that Silicon Valley has exported to the world for better or worse. There doesn't seem to be any barriers or guardrails set to enforce that and put a stop. And the legal community really struggles with this because it makes it very hard for them to do good work.
Yeah, I mean, this is slightly off topic, but an observation that I saw was a lawyer actually saying my workload has increased because now everybody who's asking me questions goes to an LLM and starts giving me more work.
But I mean, how do you trust AI when you're making serious decisions? I mean, I'm not just talking healthcare where it's life or death stuff, but business decisions. And when that backfires because AI is not really capable of doing these things that humans can, I don't know where you draw the line in terms of, liability. The risk factors become so complicated. If anything, for young people, I don't think analyst work is that promising of a future. I think getting into digital law and AI law, there's a lot bigger set of problems that need to be solved there. Anyways, but that's for another day.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. My son actually is thinking about law. He is currently a sophomore in New York at Stony Brook. So I'll give him that piece of advice too. John, since you've been in this arena for a very long time, tell us about some good examples and bad examples of how analyst relations should build relationships with analysts. What will work the best and what to avoid?
Well, sure. So it goes both ways. I mean, they have to engage with us, and we have to get their attention. And as an independent, our value to the analyst relations, kind of universe is very limited compared to the firms. Like increasingly, especially the bigger publicly traded vendors and service providers are putting more and more of their eggs in the baskets of the Gartners and Forresters because, Arthur talked earlier about impact. What matters to them are the things that, affect share price. And what they need are those third party validations like the magic quadrants and the waves, et cetera, that they can point to and say, hey, we're upper right, we're doing just fine, we're holding our own. And that ties directly to how the marketplace reacts to these things. So, there's a bit of a Chinese wall between financial analysts and industry analysts. Being an MBA, I mean, I'm one of the few analysts that I know in my world who has a good rapport with a financial analyst because I know how to read balance sheets and income statements, and I pay attention to those numbers because I understand them. But not everybody does. But there's tricky dynamics to manage there. So my advice is, for best practices is that I understand why those things are very important. But as we said earlier, you also should carve out some space for independence because we bring such a unique perspective. Not just because we can be more creative. I'm a creative person, but also because we get exposure to levels of the market that the big firms don't get. So, for example, startups, maybe tier 3 vendors who are kind of on the edge trying to break into some of these tier 1 ecosystems. they're not going to be on the radar of the big firms at all, but they might have some very cool stuff. So much like what Jeff is doing with VCons, that little ecosystem is starting to take shape. And once it becomes, if it becomes an IETF standard VCon, then there's a reality base for this to turn into something. Well, the Gartners of the world are never going to pay any attention to that, but people like me are right in the middle of it. So if you're looking for that canary in the coal mine about what's the next big thing, geez, we're better positioned than anybody to do that, right? So I think that's a heads up for the analyst relations folks who think the only way to go is to support the big analyst firms. But going the other way, for us, it's not always that easy to get on the radar for the firms that we want to be working closely with. So we have to be on the ball about what they're doing and not doing, because not all analyst relation programs are created equal. I mean, Arthur is a good example of one that's really on the ball, but there are a lot of firms that don't put a lot of stock in this stuff. Maybe tier 2 firms that are kind of like just breaking out. They don't have AR programs yet, so they're looking. So what happens is when the big vendors, when they have their downsizing, sometimes a lot of AR folks get left out, and those people are starting to look for work. So they tend to gravitate to the vendors who are maybe just creating their analyst relation programs. And if you're starting from scratch, what I have learned is it tends to be younger people. It tends to be people who are very digitally minded. So their view of what an analyst does isn't necessarily the same as people from our age bracket who have been doing this work for decades in the vendor community, that they know what analysts do. And why I'm saying that is there's becoming a very gray line now. Arthur touched on this earlier, between analysts and influencers. And again, in the digital age, social media, those metrics I don't see why, but they have a lot of value or perceived value. Again, what drives business? What drives sales, deals, customer acquisition? So again, digitally minded vendors who put a lot of stock in these things, it's important for them to be, visible, being in the conversations where there's engagement. So that means you've got to work with people who have big followings on social media. I have a pretty good following on LinkedIn, but by choice, I do not use Twitter. I am not a TikTok person. I'm not an Instagram person, but younger analysts are, right? So, or influencers who tend to be well under 40. So they're getting a lot of traction. So dollars that might normally be going to us as analysts are flowing to influencers who are not industry experts, but they are very good at what they do. So what I tell analyst relations people, make sure you know the difference. So the way I characterize it is all analysts are influencers by nature, but not all influencers are analysts, right? They're very good at amplifying other people's stuff, but if thought leadership is what you're really after, like again, where's the library? Who has the knowledge? It's the analysts. The influencers are not the ones who create that content. We do. So there's a dynamic there that I say best practices for AR programs, make sure you know the difference and support them both.
Fantastic. No, that's really good. John, I'm going to jump to the next segment, but I'm going to bring you and Arthur back for some closing remarks and other advice. Hi, everyone. What a fantastic discussion between Arthur and John. That was really good. This segment I started just to showcase not very large companies, but some tools that I've been seeing. And this is another new tool called Blockit. It's very well funded. Now, one of the things that it does is also, when you send a Calendly invite, it's always one-sided, meaning you still have to click through and, kind of manage the calendars. So Blockit is trying to become an agent where if there are 2 Blockit users, then you literally don't have to do anything. It's going to prioritize, it's going to understand the context, whether it's me asking John for a catch-up coffee chat, or I have something really serious that I need his time for. So it also handles the back and forth. There have been other agents that have been trying to do this. I haven't tried this yet because I think if you're in a corporate environment, it'll probably go through a few cycles, so not so early. But it connects to both Google and to Microsoft. Now, one of the things I wanted to see is last month, I had actually talked about Google's new, I think it's called Emma, but it's CC. I've been testing that quite a lot. So if you're thinking about your email, one of the things that it does is it actually keeps giving you some briefing every morning on what is happening in your email. The second tip I want to give you is like with Gemini in Gmail, you can now ask for like, hey, go through all my newsletters and tell me what are the top stories that I should pay attention to. Marketers need to pay attention to that simply because it means that it's no longer open rates. It's going to be AI, whatever new metric that we think of. So thanks everyone. Now I'm going to bring back John and Arthur up on the screen, and we'll have some closing remarks. Have you both met each other?
We have not. So pleasure to meet you virtually, John.
Yeah, the same here, Arthur. So you're in Switzerland, huh?
I am. So I got a little snow today myself.
Wow. Okay.
That's
Great.
true. So, I mean, I think both of you like complimented each other in the content that you shared with the audience. But I'm curious to know, like, are there any like closing remarks that you'd like to tell the community on both the analyst and the analyst relations side? I did catch. I mean, I think it's a very important problem, John, that we should have a steady stream of people coming into this career, and I guess it should also be on the analyst relations side. But go ahead, maybe Arthur, you want to comment on that, on what
Sure.
John said?
So the thing I commented on is John's comment about influencers versus analysts. I think, there is the confusion, particularly with the newer AR people, in terms of who I should engage with. I look at influencers in terms of I need my brand recognition. You've never heard of me, and this person has 10 million followers. Yes, I want them to mention my brand. Versus I need a go-to-market strategy. I need a pricing strategy. I need to understand my messaging, where I need somebody who actually has been in this space for a while. So I think that's very, very critical for analyst relations people to understand the difference. And as John said, you're going to have to spend money with both.
Yeah.
Hope so. Hope so. Yeah. That's the idea. I just to build on that, Arthur, like I've been looking at your company, which I don't know, Mimik. Hope I'm saying it right. Mm-hmm. So yours this is a good example of a company that is very, very technical and focused on very technical problems. As you had said earlier, Arthur, stuff that isn't that easy to understand. And I have found it very difficult to work with companies who are very technical minded. Basically, companies that are founded and built by engineers, they build great technologies, but they tend to be terrible at marketing and outbound communication. Having conversations with non-engineers is not their forte. And that in those kind of companies, if they buy into the AR concept, then they've got to give you the keys to the car, because they are not the ones who can lead that engagement. But you can build that bridge, right, to solve technical problems, but in language that business, decision makers, influencers, et cetera, understand and can relate to. That's the magic, right? And so to me, a really good AR program knows how to build that and kind of keep both sides happy. As you said earlier, we don't have to be technical experts, but we do have to understand it well enough that we can explain it in language that business guys understand. I cannot teach an engineer anything other than how to be a good marketer. But what we really have to get to are the buyers, and how do we make it relatable? And so that's where you are, right in the middle of creating that dialogue. And companies that don't get it, then they don't invest a lot in AR, I think, to their detriment, unless they dominate a market and don't care. But how many companies can say that?
That's true. Any closing comments? How should people get in touch with you, and who should get in touch with you? Go ahead, John, and then we'll go to you, Arthur.
Oh, well, mine's an easy one. So like you, Shashi, I mean, I'm all about the vendors and the service providers in the cloud comm space. As I mentioned earlier, UCAS, CCAS, all of them are doing AI. So yes, you see me here on LinkedIn. That's an easy one. I have my website is where I kind of do my selling and LinkedIn is where I do most of my telling. And I have a monthly newsletter and a podcast. So I'm very easy to find just getting on LinkedIn or to my site. And I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime. Oh, always.
Very good. Thank you, John. Arthur?
And I'm similar. LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. I also take my brand with me. So just like I was Memphis at Amazon.com, I'm now Memphis at mimik.com. So I engage with AR people directly, but I also engage with companies like who may be watching this and say, Blockit was a perfect example. I listened to you say that. It's like, they would be a perfect client for us. So I'm open to connecting with people however they'd like to.
Good. No, thank you both very much. I'm sure the community appreciates all the insights that you've given through this. This show is on the last Wednesday of every month, unless there is a huge calendar conflict. So feel free to suggest names. And John and Arthur, thank you again for being on the show, and looking forward to talking more. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good evening.
This has been a Players Productions Network digital broadcast.